There are breaking developments as of this morning regarding the Chattanooga Jihad, which killed 5 of our bravest young men, 5 husbands, fathers, brothers, sons, and friends to so many. Many of valor, men of valor, who were ripped from their families in an act of Islamic terror. Terror that is sweeping the world, and yes, it is penetrated in our cities across America. Equally horrifying is an Iran nuclear deal that had its starts, stops, and delays, but in the end, it became an executive agreement fostered by the Obama administration called the Obamacare Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. I have the draft. It reads like an IRS manual, difficult to understand. But what jumps out of you is shocking, and I assure you that many are not reading it, and it's up to us to make sure our lawmakers do read it. Outrage is hardly the word for what Americans of discernment and common sense are feeling right now. This is your host, Lisa Benson, and you are listening to the Lisa Benson National Security News Hour, where week after week we bring you national security and foreign policy news and commentary. Often the untold stories you would never hear in print or cable media. Please visit our website at www.lisabensonradioshow.com. Our broadcast today is dedicated to the victims of the Chattanooga shooting, and we send our condolences to their families. They are Gunnery Sergeant Thomas J. Sullivan, Sergeant Carson Holmquist, Lance Corporal Skip Wells, Sergeant, Staff Sergeant David Wyatt, and Naval Petty Officer Randall Smith. Today, our guests are experts on counterterrorism and national security. Today, our guests are Shauna Bryan from the Jewish Policy Center, was scheduled to be here as well with us, but unfortunately she has taken ill, and sitting in for her today is my friend and colleague Jerry Gordon, Senior Editor, New English Review, and author of the Iconoclast blog on New English Review. Welcome back, Jerry.
Glad to be back.
I got to change my glasses. I got the wrong glasses on, Jerry. You know how that is when you get to be this age.
Of course.
Thank you for joining us. And another colleague live from Israel, first-time guest to this broadcast, Dr. Martin Sherman. Dr. Sherman, are you with us?
Yeah, hi, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
It's a great honor. Dr. Sherman has a long career in Israeli defense establishments. He was a minister advisor to Yitzhak Shamir's government and lectured for 20 years at Tel Aviv University. Dr. Sherman is the founder of the Israel Institute of Strategic Studies, and his website is www.martinsherman.net. Well, I have both of you gentlemen on the air in a week that had us, we were jammed. It was manic trying to keep up. It was the 1-2 punch, as I call it. And I know it's late in Israel, so I would like to direct the first question to Dr. Sherman. May I call you Martin?
Yeah, sure, Lisa. Go ahead.
No, I love the accent. Thank you so much for picking our caliber of linguistics up a little bit today. You have a writing piece called Into the Fray. You just wrote a piece called Iran Reaping the Storm of Barack Obama. Now, Martin, I read this morning in a breaking development that the Palestinian Authority has asked the European Union to suspend trade with Israel because of the demolition of Hamas homes that were used as artillery bastions during the Gaza conflict. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't see that report, but it doesn't really surprise me.
And so my question is, given that Israel is being bombarded by the West in such a vicious way with the Iranian deal, with the European Union, anti-Semitism, anti-Israel sentiment, anti-Zionism, boycott and divestment, what is the sentiment and what are the feelings of the Israelis? The Pew study that came out this week says that 80-some-odd% of Israelis are significantly concerned about quote-unquote extremism we're out of Israel. We're seeing other numbers, 70%. But tell me, are we on track with having Israel understand exactly what's going on? Because they don't always understand.
Well, I think that the Israeli understanding is the most realistic. What you're seeing now with the Iran agreement is a rare demonstration of national unity. Because as you probably know, the Israeli government and the Israeli opposition rarely agree on anything. But on the Iranian deal, there is a wall-to-wall agreement that it's an appalling agreement, very dangerous, and likely to bring the region into a descent into more violence and arm race and more bloodshed. So I think we're living through one of the darkest weeks in recent history.
Yes, it is one of the darkest weeks, and it's hard to come on this broadcast and to make light of it, which brings me to my next point, and that question for both you and Jerry. Let me position it to you first. I had conversations with Israelis this week, secular Israelis, more to the left than to the right, and when I ask them how they feel and tell them that we're doing all we can to stop the Iranian deal, they sort of feel, yes, but we hear that this is what Barack Obama, this is the mantra, this is what we're hearing from the diaspora Jews on the left and now in Israel, this is what Barack Obama does to keep us out of war. And you wrote in your piece this week, Obama is the first U.S. president who genuinely conceives of Islam as not inherently opposed to American values or American interest. I want you to direct that. I'm directing that question to you because I'm stymied by there seems to be that same narrative that is being driven upon the Jewish left, whether it be in Israel or whether it be in the United States.
Well, I think it's almost indisputable that Obama is the most Islamic president in history. I think we saw this right from the beginning of his incumbency with his outreach speech to the Islamic world in Cairo, where in direct contradiction to his host's wishes, he insisted that the Muslim Brotherhood be seated in the front row for his address.
Yes, the Cairo speech.
And I think since then we've consistently seen that Obama has more or less affiliated himself with Islamic interests at the expense both of the West and certainly of Israel, whether it was his abandonment of Mubarak in the revolution in Egypt, whether it was his refusal to support the moderates in Iran in 2009 with the uprising there. So time and time again we see Obama adopting positions which I think are completely contrary to what you would expect an American president to adopt relative to all his predecessors.
Thank you, Martin. Jerry Gordon, constituencies here and abroad, the Jewish lobby particularly. We are hearing that, aren't we? This deal will keep us out of war.
Well, but that's also what some people might call fool's gold.
Mm-hmm.
Because if anything, what it's going to do, particularly the last-minute convention arms sanctions that were staged and lifted, whether it's 5 years or 8 years for the ICBM stuff, doesn't really matter. Basically, this is a deal that the international community, and in particular the EU, is mind-bendingly protecting Iran's capability to produce, if it hasn't already done so, nuclear breakout and weapons in this regard. One of the things that perhaps your listeners are not aware of is that during the Bush administration, there were discussions with Israel about what to do in terms of a possible military option. what came out of that was a realization that the Bush administration thought that sanctions was perhaps the best way of accommodating it. Actually, those sanctions really didn't go into full effect until basically 2011 and certainly in 2012 on the financial side. But what came out of that was an agreement for a joint covert project, out of which came Stuxnet and its clones. It was directed at sabotage of the Iranian nuclear enrichment and infrastructure. And it worked for a time. But that is essentially something that has been taken off the table by this agreement that was announced this past week.
It's unreal. So much has been taken off the table, and when we come back from our break, we're going to talk about that. Jerry, were you stunned as you were reading the joint agreement?
I'm convinced that if your listeners haven't gone online and downloaded the Adobe file of the agreement, they will open it up, and it looks like a VCR manual.
Yes.
It is terrible.
It's as in VCR electronics that you need to have a PhD in electronics to understand. You cannot understand it, and I worry about our lawmakers not dissecting it. Dr. Martin Sherman, you hold on. We know it's late in Israel. We have more questions to you about Bibi Netanyahu. I have questions for Jerry, and when we come back through this broadcast, we are going to discuss the tragic events at Chattanooga right now. Let's